Hello friends and welcome back to MSFS Flight Plans. I'm Nick and this channel is dedicated to making sure you never run out of things to do in the sim as we try to fly all over the world and find the coolest, most interesting spots to look at from the air. And then I spent a few days learning everything I can about what we'll be seeing on the ground just to give you your own personal tour to make it all that much more interesting. Today we are in South America again, in the Andes again, in the country of Bolivia this time, and this was almost a flight to that airport in La Paz I was telling you guys about, El Alto, which is the highest international airport in the world, and I'll tell you more about that when we do that trip, which we certainly will. But as I was looking around at here, I found some interesting geological formations that I thought we should probably check out, and then I realized that pretty much everything out here is awesome, so we're going to do Bolivia first, the city in Bolivia, which is actually the capital city. I'll tell you more about that in just a minute. But this airport is Padilla, Sierra Lima, Sierra Uniform, just to the north of Sucre, which again is the capital. And this place is up in the Andes, and I mean way up. Our elevation is close to 10,000 feet here on this strip. And we're going to be cruising at 20,000 for a portion of it, so if you want to take this flight, you can leave most of your naturally aspirated planes in the hangar for this one. And for today's flight, we will be taking the incredible MB-339 from India Foxteco, which I'd actually forgotten that I even had. I had taken it out of my community folder just to free up some space. And then I thought, man, we need something that can go fast and can climb fast, and I hadn't flown this in a while, and it's a really cool plane, so that's what we're flying today. And let's go ahead and just shut the canopy and we'll get going. And I don't think this plane has GPS navigation, but fortunately for us, we do have some VOR stations out here, so we're going to do another radio nav flight, and one of them we'll be able to fly directly at and directly away from. But as we start coming in for our approach, we're going to have to do a little bit of geometry to figure that one out. So let's get this started up, and I'll start setting up the initial configuration for our navigation. All right, it'll take a few minutes for that to get ramped up. So our first VOR signal will be 114.9. And our first radial is going to be 206. And we're not going to grab it right when we leave the runway. We're going to circle around Sucre first as we gain some altitude. And then we'll pick up on it a little bit later. So let's just go ahead and get it set. So when I turn the nav on, it'll be good to go. 206. All right, so that's good, and we'll go ahead and just get it all ready for that, and then we should be all set. Our initial altitude will be 17,500 feet, and we'll be taking it kind of slow once we leave the airport, or else we're going to have to take too huge of a turn around Sucre to see much. And we're going to fly over it pretty quick anyway, but it is an awesome-looking city, as is everything else out here. And everything you're going to see is default except for this airport. There are no additional add-ons available for any of the places we're going to except this airport, but it looks phenomenal, as you're going to see anyway. All right, one notch of flaps. Looks like all of our warning lights are off, so that's good. And I think we're good to go. And we're going to just floor it and probably still get almost to the end of this runway because the air is so thin out here. Let me just see here. I do have little NavMap pulled up, so I guess if I wanted to cheat, I could follow our flight plan, which if you want to download for any type of plane that does have a GPS plan that it can follow, I'll put that in the video description as well, but I got all my bookmarks over here on little NavMap, so I'm just going to zoom in a little bit so I know what we're looking at, so I can reference it over to my notes. All right, and we're ready. You guys ready? Let's do this. This is an awesome plane. I had just forgotten how awesome it is. Not only does it look great on the inside, almost all the buttons work, so it's not full-on study level. And I do have the live weather on. As you can see, it's beautiful, hardly any wind, so this should be just a gorgeous flight. And if you really wanted to put a bomb sight up there, you could do it by clicking that thing, but who the heck would want that there? Kind of gets in the way. All right, we need to get up to about 130 knots before we rotate. Again, because of thin air. And even then, it's going to be a struggle. All right, so up we go. Oh, baby, come on. Get on up there. All right, gears up. And flaps up. And we'll go ahead and pull the throttle back once we just get ourselves stabilized here so we can take some tighter turns around Sucre. And I'll just hand fly it till we get all the way around and back up north of the city, which is where we are now, because there's something we've got to check out before we grab that radial. All right, so I'll tell you a little bit about Sucre, which is going to be out to our left. Well, I'll tell you as much as I can. But we're going to be kind of high and going kind of fast. But it'll be worth the trip anyway because it looks so cool. There will be just a touch of popping in some of the mountains in the Andes, but by and large, I mean, it's like 1 or 2% of the landscape is going to pop on us, so it's going to be just great. Look at that little dried up riverbed down there. Wonderful. So this is the capital of Bolivia, and I really tried to spot their beautiful looking government buildings, which I saw online, but I couldn't find them. It's very densely packed down there. And what's kind of interesting about it is they look like, almost all the buildings look like old school Roman villas with the terracotta roofs and big gardens in the middle of them and mosaic tile floors. It's just really, really cool. And most of the downtown area looks like that. And in the center of town, they've got something called the Plaza de Armas, which is like their, I guess, city square. And that was built to celebrate Bolivia's quest for independence from Spain, which officially was declared in 1825. And all around the sides of it, which again I don't think we'll be able to see, but we'll check it all out from the satellite map, is where their museums and everything are. And they got a bunch of markets and stuff, so it seems to be kind of the cultural hub of the city. All right, we're going up at almost 5,000 feet a minute, so we can chill out on that a little bit. Look at that scenery down there. And they got a huge stadium downtown, which we'll see a little bit better. That's it right down there. And that's used by one of the universities. They have 4 universities out here. And their professional soccer team. And they got a couple other coliseums out here, which seem to be mostly for community use. And on the other side of this big stadium here, you can't really see it here. When we come around, you'll see it, is a huge indoor racquetball arena. When's the last time you saw one of those? And this cliff up here, which we're going to fly right around the side of it, is called Cal Orco. And that thing's nearly a mile long and 328 feet high, and it's covered with more than 5,000 dinosaur footprints. And they're vertical, so you can't really tell here because it looks like it's kind of V-shaped, but this is a straight vertical cliff that runs all the way down this way, and it is just completely covered with dinosaur tracks, and obviously they weren't defying gravity to walk on a wall. But I guess that used to be like a dry lake bed of some kind. And it said there's 462 distinct tracks from 8 different species, and one of them was a baby T-Rex, so that's pretty cool. And they said those were originally formed about 68 million years ago. So there's our airport again. How are we doing on our climb rate? Okay, that's pretty good. And out here they have their big fairgrounds. This is in this area here. And there's a big swimming pool complex. That's what this thing is right here. There's a big swimming pool in there. And down here, if you look at pictures on the ground, this is the dinosaur area. They got a bunch of huge models of dinosaurs walking around and stuff like that. Very cool looking little park. So if you're out here with the kids, or if you're just a kid at heart like me, you probably definitely want to check that out. All right, we can throttle up a bit now. Let's do that. Take it all the way to the hilt. And just before we get turned around and start heading towards our VOR station, there's a bridge I want to see if we can spot out here. And I think it's called the Sucre Point Bridge. I was trying to translate that from Spanish. And I really couldn't get any details about it, but it's the only really tall bridge out here. And it's just a standard one. It's not like a suspension bridge or anything. But if we can see it, I think it'll be pretty cool. So we're going to try to do that. And then we'll have a little time before our next stop, so I'll tell you more about the history of this place, which is interesting, to say the least. All right. So the way you'll initially spot this bridge is there's a really squiggly road that runs down to it from right to left. And if the sun's hitting it right, I think I've got the time set at 4:45. And there's hardly ever any clouds out here, so you don't have to worry about that if you do want to use the live weather. And I like this thing too here. Look at the little oxygen flow thing as I'm breathing. It's going in and out. When I take these tight turns, I should see if it starts really huffing and puffing. All right, that bridge is going to be around here somewhere, and it's worth trying to find because you just don't see things like, there it is right there. See it? There's the squiggly road, and there's that little bridge, which is probably a very big bridge if we were down there closer to it. Look at that thing. Wonder how tall that is. I really couldn't get any information about it. And it was tough to find a lot of Wikipedia information about any of this. I had to look at, once again, a lot of travel blogs. And there was some touristy info on there, which means it's probably ambiguous as far as the accuracy of it goes. So if you're from around here, please don't fault me for getting anything wrong. And feel free to correct me if you need to. I don't like being wrong. And I do like being right. Okay, so let's go ahead and hit the nav. And we'll finish our climb up to 17.5. All right, in just a minute, we're going to fly over or next to something called the Crater Gigantesco de Meteorito, which you would think with a name like that would be a meteorite crater, which is what I initially thought, which is why I wanted to come check it out. But once I clicked on it, I realized that it is not a meteorite crater, even though they called it that. It's a totally natural formation. It's also known as the belly button, and you'll understand why once we see it from the satellite map. And it is big. Wait till you see this thing. Alright, so we're just trying to peg our radial now, and we'll be heading towards our next spot after we check out the belly button here. And that's it right there. Look at that thing. When I saw that on the map, I was like, man, if that's a meteorite crater, there is nothing on Earth that looks anything like that. Because when you see it from directly above, there's kind of some points here. Like there's a point here. It looks like a triangle, which is the first thing that made me think maybe that's not a meteorite crater, because I've never seen one that was triangular. But it's 4 miles across at the widest point, which I think I measured from here to here. And it's about 1,600 feet deep. And it could probably pass for a meteorite crater if it wasn't for those pointy things on it. And if you'd like to hike the full circuit around it, you better bring an overnight bag or two. One of the tour sites I checked out said that it's about 21 miles, the full circuit, and takes 3 days. So just measuring the perimeter, which of course I had to do, that's not 21 miles, so I'm guessing probably comes around some of this area here as well. And as you can imagine, lots and lots of hiking out here. Alright, so let's get back to Sucre for a moment. For starters, the one thing that really jumps out at you when you see it on the satellite map is just how isolated it is for a capital city. I mean, it is way up here in the mountains, obviously, but it is in the middle of nowhere. And there's another big city out here in the middle of nowhere. And the reason for that has everything to do with this country's natural resources. Once the Spanish started setting up shop out here in the 1500s, they quickly discovered there was tons of silver in the mountains out here. And where there's silver, there's money to be made, and with money comes power. So it didn't take long for quite a few people to gain both wealth and influence out here. Alright, in just a second, I'm going to go ahead and set up now that we're holding at this altitude. Our next altitude is going to be 1,500, so let me set that up, get our vertical speed ready. Then we'll cruise down to that. So, instead of forcing all the rich people to build second homes at a slightly more accessible location, they all congregated right here by the mines, eventually deciding to make it the political center as well, founding it under the original name of Ciudad de la Plata de la Nueva Toledo, which translates to the City of Silver of the New Toledo. And they did that in 1538. By the early 1600s, they'd thrown a few courthouses and churches and monasteries down there so everyone could get a slice of the silver pie. And by 1624 had established the University of St. Francis Xavier, which still exists today. It's one of their 4 universities down there, making it one of the oldest in the world. In the New World, anyway. I think there's some pretty old ones out in Europe. And you may recall from our Boston flight that Harvard was founded in 1636, so that one back there, Xavier, just barely edged it out. Alright, let's go ahead and start coming down. And we'll pull the throttle back a little bit. And if you wanted to get into Xavier back in the day, there was only one hard and fast rule. You had to have wealthy and influential parents. Kind of like Harvard today. And speaking of wealth and influence, the party didn't last too long for the fine citizens of Sucre. As Spain's metallurgic taste shifted from silver to tin in the 18th century, so did their wealth, eventually migrating up to La Paz, where there was apparently more tin than you could shake a pickaxe at. And as you can imagine, the folks down here in Sucre weren't just going to sit on their silver while La Paz got all the glory, so the two competing factions of gentry decided to settle things in the traditional fashion by killing each other. A short-lived civil war called the Federal Revolution kicked off in 1899 to settle that matter, fighting not just for control over each other, but also where the true capital of Bolivia should reside. And once the body count reached satisfactory levels, the two sides agreed on a compromise, designating La Paz as the de facto capital and the location of the legislative and executive branches. And they said Sucre would remain the official capital, and they could have the judicial branch. And their Supreme Court building was back down there somewhere, but it was really hard to spot, and I did try. Alright, so we're coming up on the city of Potosi, the reigning king of hypoxia, perched at over 13,400 feet, and it claims to be the world's highest city. And like Sucre, it's just astonishing to me anyway, that another huge urban area is just parked up here in the middle of these mountains, in the middle of nowhere. And the first thing we're going to see is their 9,000-foot runway, which is going to be right here. That's the Nicola, not Nicholas. Rojas Airport, which is at an altitude of 12,850 feet. So I'm going to guess they don't have any 152s parked at the local flight school. You probably need 10 miles of runway to get that thing in the air, if you could do it at all. Alright, so let me go ahead and just set up our new heading. I'm going to take the VOR off. Well, let's turn the autopilot off. And that is going to be 283 from this VOR, which we're going to fly over right when we get by this airport. So we'll set 283. Let's go the other way for that. And we're going to kind of circle around the southern end of the city here, and then we'll catch back up with our radial. And there we go. And this place is going to be just as well detailed as Sucre was. Just incredible. Looks fantastic. And just take a look at this big hill when we fly by it, because I'm going to tell you all about that in a little bit. It may be one of the most famous mountains in the world. Alright, so there's the airport. And they've got a huge soccer stadium out here, even bigger than the one in Sucre, it looks like. And of course about a dozen other little soccer fields out here. And they got an arena right next to it, and we'll see all that real well when we circle to the side here. I can't even imagine living at this high of an altitude. I'm going to tell you a not-so-funny story about my altitude issues in just a little bit. Look at that city. Incredible. Look at that detailing. It looks amazing. Look at this. They got some little antennas sticking up over here. That stadium looks great. The arena looks great. Just unbelievable. And you can say goodbye to civilization for a while, because that's the last of it we're going to see. Any big population centers anyway. Okay, so let's go ahead and set our altitude again for 20,000. And then we'll set our vertical speed again so we don't plow into the ground. And then we'll catch our radial. And okay, 20,000. I'm messing with my external hardware here if you don't see anything moving around in the plane. And vertical speed. We'll get that to 1,500. And get our nav back on. Alright. So now that we learned a little bit about why Sucre found its place in these mountains, why do you think Potosi exists? If you guessed silver, you'd be right. Again, that mountain I pointed out to you, they got the pencil sharpener treatment back there. All those little marks and stuff all over it are not natural erosion. That is called Cerro Rico, and according to the people who it made rich, that whole mountain is made of silver ore. And that statement may not be too far from reality. The site generated 80% of the world's silver haul from the 16th to the 18th century, and they're still mining it today, making it the largest source of the precious metal ever. In fact, it left such a mark that if you look at Bolivia's coat of arms, Cerro Rico is one of the 3 icons on it, along with the condor and alpaca. And if you're thinking about relocating to the area, the mine is still in operation and hiring. Just don't make any long-term plans, because the average life expectancy for miners down there is about 40 years. Okay, now we're getting lined up on our radial. But just to keep things simple, back in the day they would mine the ore, smelt it, and mint it right there in Potosi. In fact, that was where the national mint for the Spanish colonies was back there. And then they would pack it onto llama and mule trains and endure a 300-mile trek in the exact direction that we're heading right now, across one of the deadest places on Earth, as you're going to see, as they headed down for the Pacific coast, 300 miles away, on a llama or mule. And from there they'd load it onto boats, cruise up to the then Isthmus of Panama. The canal wasn't dug out yet. Haul it another 50 miles through the malaria-infested jungles to the Atlantic coast, pack it onto galleons, and then just start praying they didn't run into Edward Teach and his crew. I figured I'd just throw that little bone to all you pirate nerds. You're welcome. So we're about to fly over 100 miles of this absolutely beautiful but absolutely desolate terrain. And I can't believe a place like this even exists on Earth, but look how good it looks. Usually places like this far from any civilization in the sim, you know how they usually look. They just start putting all that default stuff, if they even have satellite images for it, but this all looks incredibly detailed. Look at those big valleys down there, and the roads and everything. It's beautiful. And the thing I find most amazing about all this we're flying over now is if you look real close, and if we're flying a little lower, it'd be easier to see them, but all across the landscape, there's little boundary walls and these tiny, tiny little villages, sometimes just a house or two, living out here. And I can't even imagine trying to survive on your own out in a place like this. I mean, I know we've got isolated places up here in North America. You know, they have all those shows about people living in Alaska and places like that, but at least up here you could cut down some trees to build stuff or make a fire or grow something or hunt. And on that note, one thing they hunt out here apparently is guinea pigs. It's a national cuisine. Probably not too many people keeping them as pets unless they're planning on cooking them up for dinner. And people have been living out here and surviving for quite a while. This was all Inca territory before the Spanish arrived. So I'll share some stats with you about the climate out here. Obviously it's dry. They average about 17 inches of rain per year, almost all of it coming during the warmer months. And from April to September, they barely get an inch of rainfall during that whole time period. But they do get rain. And we're about to see a massive lake up here on our right side, which will be to the north. We can't quite spot it just yet. So you might be wondering why there's almost no vegetation out here if they do get some water. And you can see some little trees and shrubs popping up, and I don't even know if that's accurate. I didn't get close enough on the satellite map to see if there's really stuff growing here. And then down by where the water is, you can see some light vegetation. Well, the ground level altitude beneath us right now is almost 16,000 feet. And the average tree line in the Andes, you know, the area above which trees don't grow, is roughly 12,800 feet. So we're just too high for much of anything to grow out here. And the temps out here are pretty steady throughout the year with an average daily temperature in the warmest months, which is, well, I guess would be our wintertime months, at around 50 degrees. And the coolest month of July posts an average temp of around 41, so that's not a huge range. That's Fahrenheit, obviously. Okay, let me tell you my quick story about my altitude issues. I mentioned in that, let's see, was the Whistler Mountain flight about my trip to Breckenridge a few years ago. And, you know, I live here in Jacksonville. Probably, in fact, I know the sea level of my yard is 40 feet. I don't do a lot of high altitude traveling, walking, breathing, anything like that. And the place we were staying at in Breckenridge, and I think the base camp, you know, where the lodge is for Breckenridge, is at 9,000 feet. And we landed at Denver, drove out there, and I had to drive the van that my family was in, which was my extended family. There was about 20 of us in there because no one else had ever driven in snow, and I'd lived in Buffalo for a while, so I was driving a rear-wheel drive van in the snow of Breckenridge. You can imagine what that was like. And I didn't have any issues until I started unloading all the luggage, and then I was like, man, I'm really out of breath. So I didn't think much of it until we went out to the slopes the next day, and I hadn't skied in about 20 years, so whenever you haven't skied in a long time, it's always a good idea to get on the lift and take it to the very top of the mountain, which of course is what I did, and I think that's around 13,500 feet out there. And I was feeling a little bit lightheaded, and so I started coming down probably 500 or 600 yards and wiped out, of course, and I could not get back up. Not for lack of strength, but I could not catch my breath. And so my ever-adoring wife and my brother-in-law came down, and she started making fun of me, and I said, I'm fine, just going down. And then the guys with the little emergency sled came by and asked if I was okay, and I was like, yep, I'm not hurt, I'm fine, I need to rest for a minute. So I scooted the next, 1,200 yards down on my butt between my skis because I could not stand myself up. And that night when I got home, I was migraines, vomiting all night, full-blown altitude sickness, and nobody else that was with us had any issues whatsoever. So that was my trip to Breckenridge. Luckily, my father-in-law had brought a couple of pills his doctor had given to him, but those took about 24 hours to take effect, so I did not join everyone on the slopes the next day. All right, here's this big body of water out here, and if you didn't know how to pronounce it, which I didn't, it might look like it's called Lake Poo-Poo, but it's called Lake Po'opo. And that thing used to be significantly larger than it is today. And just real quick to point out, this looks a lot like Mexico City did. They've got all of these old extinct volcanoes out here all over the place. Look at all this. Every big mountaintop's a volcano, and all these things are just volcanic craters out here. But this lake isn't shrinking due to a lack of rainfall, because they do get some of that out here, like Lake Mead is out in Nevada. That's the problem they're having, which I think has filled itself back up a little bit. But this thing used to be fed by the glaciers around here. And now all of the glaciers have melted. And it is shrinking a lot. They say that's about 2% of its original size. 2%. So you can kind of see where the shoreline would have been. And there's a little town out here, which is the only real population center on the whole lake. And I think because I could see the little dredge marks going all the way out there on the satellite map, that the water level probably used to go all the way up to the town. And now it's 6 miles away from the town. And if you have a satellite map with real good resolution like Google Maps, you can see just all along the shoreline here are old abandoned boats that just got stuck on the land and no one can move them back out there again. That's pretty crazy, isn't it? All right, I've got a few Bolivia fun facts for you until we get to our next spot. Bolivia is the home to the tallest Jesus statue, called Cristo de la Concordia in Cochabamba. And that thing is 112.2 feet tall. And no, the Christ the Redeemer statue in Rio is not the second tallest. I would have thought that was the first tallest because it's probably the most famous. That one's only 98 feet tall. The Christ the King statue in Poland comes in second place if you don't count its metallic crown, which technically, I guess, is not part of the statue because you can tell it was kind of bolted onto it. But if you do throw the crown in there, that one easily takes the cake at 157 feet. So if you're doing your world tour of Christ statues, you probably want to start out there. Look at all this stuff. Unbelievable. There's another little town out there. And I think this one even has a tiny little dirt strip out here somewhere. That might be it right there. I think that is it. If you wanted to go down there and land, we couldn't get this thing down there, I don't think. Look at all this. I mean, there's fields everywhere. If you're thinking about building a home in Bolivia, you might want to grab yourself a mummified llama fetus. Some Bolivians believe it to be good luck to bury the little rascal in the foundation of your new house before you pour the concrete. And up in La Paz, apparently they have something called the Witches Market, where you can buy plenty of mummified llama fetuses. And this country claims to possess the world's most dangerous road, which quite fittingly is called Death Road. But if you're looking for it on a map, you can search for the Youngest Highway, which is the official name. And that's up by La Paz, which again we will be checking out eventually. You can take the 40-mile, extremely narrow passage running right along a very steep drop-off. And they say that on average about 25 motorized vehicles and 2 bikes go over the edge every year. And if you're brave enough to climb down the embankment, you can even see the rusting carcasses of some of its victims. They said they got a bunch of rolled over buses and stuff down there, which is probably a little bit eerie. And if you've never thought of Bolivia as a really big country, well, maybe you should. It's roughly the size of Texas and California combined. And I'll confess, I also didn't know it was that large. And lastly, if you've ever wondered how Bolivia got its name, and I'm sure you're probably just thinking about that, it's named after Simon Bolivar, a major figure in the wars of independence from Spanish rule out here, with the liberation of 5 South American countries on his resume. All right, now here's something you don't see every day, unless you live out here, I guess. That white expanse out there, stretching as far as the eye can see, that's called Salar de Uyuni, and that's not snow or ice out there, it's salt. It is the world's largest salt flat and nearly 4,000 square miles of surface area. And all this stuff that we see out here today was once part of a prehistoric lake that covered this entire region, including Lake Poopó, and another salt flat we'll see on approach in a few minutes. So all of this, much like Mexico City, was underwater with just these volcanic peaks sticking up out of it. And it was never really deep either, but it was big. So you can see why it evaporated pretty quick once it lost its source of water. And this thing out here is not salt all the way down. What we're seeing is just a few meters of crust, salty crust, sealing in a shallow brine lake beneath it. And because that is so exceptionally flat and so huge and so easy to see from space, since there's never any clouds out here, they use it as a target to calibrate the altimeters of observation satellites, which is pretty cool. And when there's a little water sitting on the front top of it, it becomes the world's largest mirror at, I think, 81 miles across. And you can see they got a little standing water out there right now. And it's also got a bit of fame on the silver screen, being the filming location of the 2017 Star Wars flick The Last Jedi, where it portrayed the planet Crate. Can you imagine the kind of hangnails you'd have to deal with after working out there for a few hours? Man, my skin's getting tight just thinking about all that salt. Well, if you want to make a quick buck, haul a big truck of Vaseline out here while people are out there shooting films. And lip balm. Now, what's cool about all these little things here is that near the base of pretty much all of these little volcanoes, there'll be a little town down there, and most of them have fields covering the entire thing. And I'm guessing the reason for that is because this ground out here is probably just too salty to grow much of anything, but they really take advantage of this old volcanic soil up here. And check this thing out, ready? Look at this little pond right there. In Google Maps, this is also called a meteorite crater. Let me look at it real quick out the window. And when I checked that out from the air, I noticed there's also a town right there, and also little farms going all the way down to that little pond, so I figured that might not be a meteorite crater either. It turns out it's not. I think it is a collapsed volcanic cone, but that looks like a meteorite crater, so I wonder if Google just looks around the world and the AI just says, yep, it looks like a meteorite crater, let's just call it that. Because now we've seen two examples of that, although that big one back there was actually named something in Spanish. Google just got that one wrong. So you can imagine my excitement thinking there was going to be two craters out here. Okay, so let me pay attention to what's going on. We need to get 116 miles away from, I'm looking at our little DME thing here, from that last VOR. And once we are that far away, we're going to get to channel 116, which is the other VOR, which is south of us off to our left. And we're going to follow that one until we're 93 miles away from it at a heading of 328. I'm going to go ahead and take our altitude down to 16,000 because that's going to be our approach altitude so that we can clear this big ridge right in front of that. Okay. I need to just kind of keep an eye on that for a second. And this big thing way out, well, where is it? Hold on. There it is right there. That thing's called Volcan Tanupa, and that tops out at around 17,500 feet. And that was formed, it's extinct now, but it was formed about 1.4 million years ago, and about halfway up the southern face is a cave with several mummified corpses on it. And one side I came across said they're about 800 years old, so they'd be pre-Columbian. And you should really check out some pictures of those things. Just Google Tanupa mummies. They look like they just died in place. They're not all wrapped up like Egyptian mummies. One of them's like even leaning up against a wall with, it looks like wearing the clothes that it died in probably. There's still hair on it. I mean, it's wild. Really cool. And it looks like they just left them there. So if you're a tourist and you want to go up there and check it out, you can just go see them where they are. Okay, so let's take off the autopilot and let me turn this to 116 because that's going to be our next one. And we're going to be heading of 328 for that one. Once we get out there. And we're not quite there yet, so let me just, well, we can go ahead and hit it, I guess. What's it going to hurt? All right, let's go ahead and start getting down to vertical speed. I mean, even the finest details are rendered accurately down there. And I didn't even notice any popping yet. Did you guys? Just nothing. Looks like they got some little buildings out there, though, doesn't it? Okay. Alright, so this big thing up here is another huge salt flat. And that one's called Salar Coipasa. And I read that both of these giant salt beds are big breeding grounds for flamingos. And we've actually seen a few locations that attract flamingos as we've explored the world. And most of them look pretty similar to these things, so there must be something they like to eat that lives in these shallow salt ponds. Because that seems to be the common denominator. And if you Google the name of this place online, you see all kinds of pictures of guys out there just harvesting the salt, using big snow shovels, just throw it in the back of trucks. So that must be big business out here, for whoever lives out here. And as you can see, this one still has some exposed water. And man, can you imagine the salt concentration in that? I wonder if it's even more than the Dead Sea. You might even be able to walk on water if it's buoyant enough. Maybe that was the secret back in the day. Look at that. Salt. Nothing but salt. Good grief. I mean, why go through the hassle of making those evaporative ponds that we've seen in some of the other locations, like that island out in Greece? They had those things all over the place. The Canary Islands had them everywhere. Just haul it out of here. I'm sure they got a rail line or something coming out here. Okay, so once we get 93 miles away, we're just going to take a heading. We're going to turn off the VOR and just take a heading of 261. So let me just go ahead and get that set up, and then we'll switch to heading navigation. And then we're going to have to do a little visual reference flying. I'll tell you about that when we get out there. And again, I'll put all the notes for the steps if you want to also do a radio nav flight, so you don't have to try to remap it out yourself. If you want to fly it just as we did, I'll put that in the video description as well. So the runway heading is 261, so that's where I'm going to make my heading. And what we're gonna do, the runway is right at the base of this second volcano out here, so we're gonna have to kind of cut over this side of that and then aim towards this northern base of that, and that'll kind of get us lined up good enough. But there's this big ridge here that you need to be at about 16,000 feet to get over. And then we're gonna have to come down real fast once we get over the side of that. So we're gonna come down to 16,000 right now. Just chill out there. Okay, let's go ahead and turn our heading nav on. Alright, so we're off of VOR now. And we'll just put this on standby. And fly heading. And there's a little tiny town right on this side of this big mountain over here. And that one's called Cerro. I don't know if it's Willa, W-I-L-L-A, or Villa, V-I-L-L-A. Because it depends on where you click. And the volcano is called Uyuni Plane, which means red or blood fortress. And sadly, there's no blood or fortresses up there. And there doesn't appear to be, other than that little town out there, there aren't any farms or anything on this one. So I'm guessing everyone that's living out here is making all their money to buy food somewhere else by harvesting salt. And you'll see when we get out here, there's even like some salt dunes out here. You can see them kind of rippling across this. I mean, it is crazy. Look at all this out here. That is amazing looking. And if some of these hills look a little smooth, that's really what they look like. But you can see they got the jagged peaks. I mean, they nailed all this around here. It looks fantastic. Alright, so let's pick up the pace again. Alright, so I feel like our orientation's not quite right, so I'm just going to use our heading knob to take a little bit of a southerly turn here, because we don't want to come over the top of that mountain. We're going to kind of split the difference right between those mountains. And then I'll twist it back to 261 for a direct heading course. And we'll see if we can spot any of the salt dunes. But this is an unbelievable landscape, isn't it? Just crazy. And right when we come over that ridge, the airport is going to, this end of the airport is going to kind of dead end into a little town called Caricuima, which does appear to have a slightly larger population than some of the other stuff we've seen out here. And they said the town is a central meeting location from some of the indigenous Aymara people. And by the way, another little interesting fact about Bolivia, 55% of the population in this country is indigenous people, which I think is the highest concentration of them in all of Latin America, which is pretty cool. But apparently the locals use this little town we're going to fly over to hang out at when they hang out. And as soon as we get to the other side of this salt flat, we're going to be crossing into Chile as well. But in that little town, they've got some churches, a clinic, a school, and it said they even have electricity on some afternoons, which means they probably get it all from solar power. I'm sure they have no shortage of sunshine out here. Look at that. See those little salt dunes out there? Is that wild or what? Oh, maybe some salt trucks out there. Bust out the snow shovels. Pile it in. See, there's that little town. You can barely see it right over there. Yeah, I can't even imagine, with almost no humidity out here as it is, living in just a salt world. Oh my gosh. Ouch. And if you need to know, the altitude of this airport we're coming into is 12,400 feet. So once again, no little prop planes allowed out here unless they're turbos. Alright, so let's take that back to 261 now. We're probably pretty close. And then we'll be able to spot the runway once we come over that far ridge, and we're going to have to start slowing down pretty good. Alright, let's see if we can see any farms of any kind. I don't see any. And if we were this close to some of those other little volcanic peaks that we saw, you would definitely see it as just a patchwork of little walls marking out the farm boundaries. I mean, maybe some of that snow. It's high enough. But who would know the difference between the snow and the salt out here? Look at that. More salt dunes. So it'd probably be pretty cool to like get a snowmobile out here and some skis and have someone just pull you around and you could salt ski. Just pray to God that you don't get a cut. Although it'd probably stop bleeding pretty quick. Look at that. I've never seen anything like that. It looks like Antarctica or Greenland, but it's nothing but freaking salt. Insane. Look at this over here. Look at these little details. Little roadways coming through here. Wonderful. And this little volcano right here is called Mama Juanapa, which is an awesome name. But unfortunately, I couldn't find any information about that. And the airport is going to be right at the base of it. And it is a skinny, skinny little strip, but it's like 9,000 feet long, which is probably going to be good because we're going to have to come in a little bit hot, I think. All right, let's start slowing down. My gear speed is 175. And right when we get over that mountain, I'm going to turn off the autopilot and we'll come on in. And as always, stick around because we will pull over a little NavMap at the end and take a closer look at some of the stuff from the satellite map. So you can see some of the details we couldn't see from our speed and altitude on this flight. Man, all of the Andes, except the southernmost regions of South America, just look unbelievable. Every single flight I've taken, again, except for that southern region, has been this good as far as the detailing and accuracy goes. Just pick a spot out here. Yeah, so I don't want to do La Paz again just yet because we probably need to bounce out of South America for just a little while. I don't want anyone to overdose on it, but we'll definitely be coming back to it. Okay, so there's our runway right there. See it? And let's slow way down, and we're going to have to get our speed brake out too. So we'll throw that all the way out. Might have thrown that a little too soon. I think the speed brake limit is 250, but it sounds like it's still attached. And then our gear speed is going to be 175, which we'll hit as soon as we get there. That'll slow us down some more. We'll take up our speed brake. All right, that looks close enough. What do you guys think? And speed brake up. And the first flap speed is going to be 160. And you'll see this little town as soon as we nose down here. All right, one notch of flaps. And the second one's going to be 140. Okay, we need to come over this way a little bit. And that runway was built not by the town there, but the Chilean Air Force built that. Probably the only landing spot out here anywhere, I would guess. And we're not too far away from that Aermacchi desert that I mentioned in that Santiago flight, which purports to be the driest place on Earth. So I think if you cross over these mountains here, that's where you'd be. All right, last notch of flaps. Let's come on and do this. And if you are a DCS fan, you can even launch bombs if this plane had any. If this livery didn't have any. Or drop bombs, I guess. There's our little town. You can see how skinny that runway is. Very skinny. What kind of wind are we dealing with? Ooh, a 20-knot headwind. Sure doesn't feel like it, does it? That'll probably help, but that runway is extremely long. And if we weren't in a military plane coming down at 2,500 feet a minute, it would probably be a little brisk. All right, our approach speed should be around 115, which I'm probably going to keep that a little bit faster because the air is so thin up here. And I'm not going to drive all the way back to this end of the runway. We'll just pull off that little road on the side. Doesn't appear to be a lot of traffic out here. So I thought maybe there'd be a solar farm or something out here, but it just looks like from way up in the air that some of the buildings have solar panels on them. So again, I'm going to wager that solar power is how they're getting their juice. Probably charge the batteries in the morning and then they have power for a little while once it gets dark for lights and things like that. Oh, now we're getting a little wind. Okay. All right. Boy, that is a skinny runway. A little floating there. All right, brake, flaps up. Stay on the runway, Nick. All right. Boy, you can just feel the dryness out here, can't you? Very, very dry. All right, we're going to pull over this little road over here. Looks like a taxiway to me. I got a little moss growing on it. Must not get a lot of traffic out here. Okay, I'll shut her down, open the canopy, put on my chapstick, and we'll take a look at little NavMap. Alright, here we go. So just to show you how easy this really is to spot from space, these big salt flats, and that engine will stop whining once it winds down here. Look at that. I mean, what do you think the height for the space station is? Maybe like that? Although they always seem a little bit closer than I figured they would be. Probably like that. But you'd have no trouble spotting that, would you? So here's where Santiago was, way down here. And actually, we are at the very, very northern border of Chile, so maybe that big dry desert's probably in this area right here. But look at the size of that thing. Unbelievable. All right, let's get back down to Sucre. And here's where La Paz is, right out here. So that's where we're going to be taking that flight. And I'm not even going to zoom in because I want to surprise you by all of it, although you've probably flown out there before. So there's the belly button. We'll get back to that in just a second. So here's where we left from. I'm not even going to try to say that name. And we came out here, and we'll come back around to that stuff to the north in just a minute. But let me show you all these. Look at all these buildings down here. Every one of them has those beautiful courtyards. I imagine this is what Rome looked like in like 1 AD. If you watch Time Team or any of the places where they dig up these villas, and then they make like an artist rendering of what they look like, this is what they all look like. So here's the Plaza de Armas. And they got all kinds of little markets and stuff down there. And the museums are down here. So that's pretty neat, huh? I would love to take a vacation out there. And here's some of their arenas and soccer fields. But let me show you the little dinosaur place before we get back over downtown. Look at this. So this is a vertical cliff right here. And can we see? That would be so cool if we could see the dinosaur prints. I don't think we can. Well, how close can we get? I don't see any, do you? Nope, it's too shadowed. And it looks like it's in some phase of construction, but they've got all kinds of... Can we spot any dinosaur statues? Let's see if we can see that anywhere. Boy, it looks like this is... I don't know when that place opened, because they're obviously building this up right now. So there probably aren't any dinosaur statues in the satellite image. Okay, so here's their Coliseum. There's their big soccer arena. There's where that racquetball court is. As strange as that is. Who still plays racquetball? I guess people in Bolivia do. There's their swimming pool thing. And then there's those fairgrounds, which we really couldn't see from there. We were a little too far away. But let me show you where that bridge is. So I guess if you're trying to spot it, let's see if there's some sort of landmark feature. Okay, so this thing kind of comes to a little point right here, and that's getting pretty close to it. But if you zoom in a little more, you'll see some of these squiggly roads right here, and then that's it. And that thing looked great in the sim. Really cool. Nice little gem out there for us. And here's the belly button, which is called a meteorite crater. Look at that thing. So I guess, you know, maybe these are the hiking trails. They kind of look like them. They probably go all around this rim because that's certainly not 21 miles if you just go around that central part there. All right, so that's that. So here was that first VOR that we came into. And the angles have now disappeared since we've gone over the flight plan. But we'll take that first one, which again was 206 degrees coming into here. We flew over it a little bit to come over the town of Potosi out here. And let's zoom into that a little bit. There was that huge stadium, the arena. Look how many soccer fields they have out there. And then here's Cerro Rico. That is the mountain, made of silver ore. Biggest producer of silver in the world ever. Crazy. And just to give you an idea of how far they had to haul that to the coast on a mule, look at that. Crazy. And I didn't mention this little place here, but this is interesting. This is was an old mine for tin, actually, so the people in La Paz were probably pretty interested in this. And it was originally owned privately, one of the few mines in all the country that wasn't owned by the state mining companies. And this was owned privately for a while, and then it kind of dried up, so they turned it over. They didn't want to have to kick everyone out of town, so they turned it over to the miners, and the miners ran it as a co-op. And then the original owners came back in, sold it to a Canadian place for a while. They abandoned it, and now, again, today, it is run by a co-op of miners. And you can see it's not very big, but of course they have their soccer field out there. But that's pretty neat, and you can spot that from the sim. We were a little bit far away, but you could see it down there, so that was neat. And then here's Lake Po'opo, and let's see if we can see any of those boats just for fun along the shoreline there, if we can get enough resolution. The Google map, you definitely could. I'm not seeing any. They look like just tiny little black dots all along the coast, and here's where that town was, or town is. And you can see here, this is probably where they had dredged out their channel for the boats to come out here. That's now 6 miles away from the shoreline, and I bet it's even smaller than this now. I don't know when the satellite image was taken. But that's crazy. So if you think about how big this probably was its full size, if that's 2% of its original size, I'm guessing it probably went all the way down here. That was probably all underwater. Probably all the way up here. That almost looks kind of like a shoreline there. But that still doesn't seem like it'd be 2%, but that's crazy. And here's Uyuni, Salar de Uyuni, world's largest salt flat. And there's the volcano. And the mummies in the mummy cemetery are up along one of these ridges right over here. You should definitely check out a picture of that online. Very cool. And then so this is the other VOR we were kind of trying to triangulate off of, this one down here. So once we were a certain distance out from that, which again, I'll have all the steps in the description, then we just caught this radio coming from this one, and then we caught this runway heading of 261 to come on in here. And if you're trying to visually fly it, again, just kind of split the difference between this volcano here, which you, of course, won't miss because it's sticking up in the middle of that salt flat, and then this one, which you'll also see. And then as soon as you come over this big ridge right here, that's where you'll spot that runway. You won't miss it. So that's that. Very cool flight in a very cool place. Learned a lot. Had an absolute blast as always. Can't wait to see you all again in the skies. Later.